Adding fuel to fire. A defiant and outraged Donald Trump threatens protesters across the US. He said he could deploy the army to deal with them. But is that the answer to growing public anger? And will this speech give it more momentum? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Vinell. Many are calling for a healing speech from President Donald Trump, tackling racial inequality and police reform head-on. Those are the demands of many protesters who are outraged by the death of Black American George Floyd at the hands of a police officer. After several nights of the worst unrest in decades, Trump had this message. He is the president of law and order. He said he's an ally of peaceful protesters, but threatened to deploy the military if local officials fail to control the unrest. That's led to criticism that he's threatening an escalation of force. And as he spoke, peaceful demonstrators close to the White House were being dispersed by tear gas and rubber bullets. The president then walked to a church damaged by riots and posed with a Bible in front of the building.
We cannot allow the righteous cries of peaceful protesters to be drowned out by an angry mob. The biggest victims of the rioting are peace-loving citizens in our poorest communities. And as their president, I will fight to keep them safe. I will fight to protect you. I am your president of law and order and an ally of all peaceful protesters. But in recent days, our nation has been gripped by professional anarchists, violent mobs, arsonists, looters, criminals, rioters, Antifa, and others.
Streets in the US, empty only days ago because of the pandemic, have been filled with protesters following the death of George Floyd. Dozens of cities have imposed or extended curfews. Most demonstrations have been peaceful, but there's been some violence and looting. 2 autopsy reports concluded Floyd's death was a homicide. Medical experts hired by Floyd's family said he died of asphyxiation as his neck and back were compressed by police officers. An official examiner blamed heart disease, neck compression and restraint, and also said he'd previously used intoxicants. That contradicted an initial finding suggesting his death was due to pre-existing conditions. George Floyd's brother has called for calm. As we heard earlier, President Donald Trump has blamed the unrest on professional anarchists, looters, criminals, the leftist group Antifa and others. Let's have a listen to why some protesters have taken to the streets.
We're doing this because not only are we oppressed physically, we are oppressed mentally. We are oppressed as a people. Police officers are oppressed. Their minds are poisoned to believe that they have to hurt us when they see us. The system oppresses all of us, black, white, brown, and everything in between. We are here to free the minds of everyone so that they understand and they're liberated enough to take a stand for themselves so that we can all live a life that's free. Humanity should be able to prosper, and we are all humans. But we aren't all together until we respect one another and until we take those from underneath us and bring them up with us.
I cannot just sit in my room, continue my studies, continue to work as if nothing is wrong. This is something that is affecting every single black person in the United States, and it is the duty of non-black allies like myself to come out here, to put our bodies out, to show that this is not acceptable. It never was. And so we're here today to really demand that there are investigations into the death, the murderers of George Floyd, but also that police brutality is addressed specifically here in Los Angeles as well.
People need to come out here and give positive energy, give off positive vibes, positive a push in the right direction. Against how do I say this? Against the fact that everyone matters, everybody has a place in this world. As you can see, the energy is matched. I want President Trump to make better decisions. Everybody on this planet matters. Everybody on this planet has a place. Everybody has power, and we need to unite.
Joining us now are our guests. From Washington, D.C., we have Niambi Carter, Assistant Professor of Political Science at Howard University. From here in Doha, Mohammed Cherkaoui, he is a political analyst. And again from Washington, D.C., Jennifer Victor, Associate Professor of Political Science at George Mason University. A warm welcome to you all. Niambi, I'd like to start with you. Donald Trump has made it pretty clear he is doubling down in taking a forceful approach to these protests. He's calling himself the president of law and order, threatening even to dispatch the military. How do you see this all playing out? Is this going to escalate things?
Absolutely. And I think in a place like DC, where we don't have a governor as a stopgap between the president and his deployment of military resources, this is going to be very bad for this city. But in other places where he is calling for more strident quelling of these righteous protests, I think this is going to end badly. I think it's going to make people more frustrated. And I think it's going to give law enforcement more license to harm activists. We saw he did this yesterday in advance of the curfew that the DC mayor had put out at 7. He started firing on people earlier than the actual curfew. So I think this is a bad idea.
Jennifer, if we go down that road, what should the Trump administration be doing then?
So just to agree with my colleague here, we have several decades of social scientific research that shows that when you have confrontation of this type and civil unrest in the street, when the law enforcement comes out with riot gear and basically a militarized presence, it escalates the tension and creates more violence. The research shows that when the law enforcement comes out with a sense of listening and solidarity and a sense of protection, and helping to promote the free speech rights rather than to create a sense of conflict, then it can have the effect of de-escalating the violence.
Mohammed Cherkaoui, I'd like to bring you in. Does President Trump have a point at all that some amount of force may need to be used? I mean, people are being injured, some people have been killed, businesses are being looted. Does he have a point at all?
Well, I think there are two issues here. One, this is a confrontation between Trump's drive for power politics versus moral politics or morality. And I think those rioters have certain legitimate reasons why we have this escalation. There is a frustration, there is a fear of the future, there is concern over unemployment and so forth. The other issue I find that is quite alarming in Trump's presidency is his tendency to export responsibility. I don't see any sense of good leadership that is expected at this critical time. Therefore, he is positioning himself as a factor of creating a chaotic situation more than having a sense of moderation, a sense of conciliating with his opponents. I think he is playing out his law and order discourse that should not be something that would help him escalate the situation. I'm expecting him to figure out a way to de-escalate the situation and bring Americans together. Unfortunately, he does not get the point that this is not a time of politics. This is a time of reason, morality, and good policy handling.
Niambi, is Donald Trump in denial about the state of America, the hurt, the anger? Is he in denial about what's happening?
I don't think he's in denial. I just think he doesn't care. I mean, these are not new things. I will say, to be fair to Donald Trump, a lot of the issues that these protesters care about predate Donald Trump. I mean, these are centuries old in some cases, issues we have with anti-Blackness in this country. That said, Donald Trump is very aware of what people want, of why people are angry, but he does not care that people are hurting. What he cares about is this show of force. And I think what he wants to be is an imperial president. And the fact that he cannot keep people from expressing their First Amendment right, and that all this police force does and all this sort of showing of the National Guard does is make people more resolute to resist. And so I think Donald Trump has a narrative that he wants to play in his head, where he gets to show himself as sort of the hero of this story, rather than looking at the people, listening to the people, and actually trying to figure out ways where he can use this moment, right, as a real leadership moment, right? This would be a test for him as a president, but he sees it not as a test to be great and to live up to the moment, but he sees this as a moment to sort of squelch and beat down citizens of the United States who have righteous grievances. And
Jen-
so I think Donald Trump will not rise to the moment.
Jennifer, assuming Donald Trump does go down this way, does put himself forward as the president of law and order, does try to appeal to his base of supporters, I mean, is it likely to work for him, being that the president of law and order, or putting himself forward as the president of law and order, worked for Nixon in 1968, but this is not 1968. Is it going to work for Trump?
Yeah, there's a number of ways in which this isn't 1968, and the main way in which it's different is that we have much greater partisan polarization today than we did in 1968, when there was actual agreement across the political parties on some issues, even related to racial justice. What I think is important to look at when we're trying to calculate both why Trump is providing the rhetoric that he is and how successful it's likely to be is his track record. And his track record shows that he has gained political advantage every time he has worked to stoke divisions. So it seems absolutely clear to me that the reason he is using this rhetoric that is very aggressive and very much centered on threat and security and this sort of machoism approach to understanding what's happening right now rather than listening to grievances is that every time in the past when he has used that type of rhetoric, it has worked for him. It has elevated him. It has galvanized conservatives or certain elements of conservatism to his side. And he's hoping that that will happen here. He's doing that as a way to both distract from the disastrous American response to coronavirus and the disastrous economic consequences that we're now also experiencing, and to rally his troops and create the divisions between his supporters and those that are raising grievances about racial justice. In the past, it has worked. Whether or not it will continue to work as this dramatically escalates and is likely to continue to escalate, I think remains to be seen. It's not certain to me that he should count on it.
Mohammed, in a report you wrote back in 2016, after President Trump was elected, you posed this question: will President Trump now distance himself from the racist, xenophobic, misogynistic and Islamophobic positions heralded for by candidate Trump during his 17-month campaign? Those were your words, your own question. 4 years later, seeing what we're seeing now on the streets, how would you answer your own question?
I had high hopes he would learn from the practice of presidency at the White House, and he would learn from his hands-on, perspective, since he was not from the political establishment. But unfortunately, I must express my disappointment because he has gone higher and higher in this tendency of pushing his way without learning, and I don't think that he has a good circle of advisors around him. Some of those, like the former Secretary of State and the former Secretary of Defense, John Mattis, were the equilibrium that brought for a while certain balance. And I think both gentlemen managed to stop him from taking this kind of draconian approaches. Now he is left with more Trumpian advisors that are sort of praising him probably. And I think one of his main mistakes is he has been betting on 30% of the votes. I'm talking about right-wing, extreme right, and some evangelists who he believes would still maintain the presidency for him on November 3rd. I think the dynamics have changed. He has not learned his lesson, and also he has not really updated his awareness what is boiling now in America, what Corona has done. And I think, and if I can put it in a nutshell, he is not a president of leadership. He is a manager of crisis. He jumps from one crisis to another one, and he thinks he can do his dances. And I think this is going to be a moment of truth where even those right-wingers will need to sit down and reflect where we are heading. And I think this is a very low point in the history of constitutional and democratic United States.
Okay, let's move on just from looking at Donald Trump. Niambi, is America's moral legitimacy, some might say it's even in the past tried to project moral superiority, is that being eroded now?
Well, I mean, I think it's always been questionable, particularly for those nations that have looked at us around the world and have identified racism as a severe flaw in the United States. We saw it in Vietnam, we saw it during the Cold War. So it's not new. I think what is new is having this particular president. Donald Trump is a businessman who knows leadership, but he does not understand governance. And what he doesn't understand about governance is that sometimes when you're leading, you're also serving, right? Most of the time, what you are doing is being in service to your people, to your citizens. And he does not understand that. I think Donald Trump views the United States as a business, and he wants to run it as such. And he wants to be able to be the last decision maker at all times, and not understanding that he has limited powers, and that's on purpose, right? The Constitution is written in that way on purpose because it's supposed to be co-equal branches. And right now, we'll say he has been aided and abetted by a Senate majority who has not saw fit to put a stopgap on some of these bad behaviors and have gone right along for the ride. So he hasn't done this by himself. There are other actors who are also complicit in this. And I absolutely think that the United States' esteem in the world has suffered because of it.
Jennifer, as we heard earlier, various people have blamed various parties for stoking violence. The majority of these protesters are peaceful. But as we've heard, Trump has blamed Antifa. We've heard other sides blaming, extreme right-wing groups, left-wing groups, foreign agents. Is blame being assigned for political gain now?
I think blame is probably almost always assigned for political gain. And again, this is part of Donald Trump's playbook. He has not shown any interest in using messages of reconciliation or unity. He uses much more aggressive rhetoric. And to build a little bit on the point my colleague was just making, not only is he, I think it's fair to say that his skills are not just in business, but they are in media. He's kind of a media genius, and he really does not appear to know very much about governance or bureaucracy or the structure of bureaucracy or even how his own people who work under him often are organized. He's been pointing to the leader of the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff as taking over something, which makes no sense. He is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs is essentially an advisor to the security at the White House that provides military advice for the strategic purposes of the president, and he doesn't lead troops in that sense. In any case, it just emphasizes that the way that Trump projects leadership is by creating these divisions and assigning blame and raising a sense of outrage and a sense of anger. And the more one side feels, the side that is closer to him sort of feels galvanized by that, then the other side, of course, raises up in opposition because it's incredibly unjust. It's often very violent. The rhetoric he was using yesterday was incredibly incendiary, talking about using military forces on American citizens. We've never heard rhetoric like this from an American president in this widespread kind of way. It's incredibly unusual, very uncertain, and unsettling. It's the type of rhetoric you hear from authoritarian dictators, not from the United States president. And it does wind up degrading and eroding further the democracy and the level of democracy in the United States, to the extent that there are both judicial protections and civil liberties that are under threat. And I think the world is seeing that.
Speaking of authoritarian dictators, Mohammed, Trump's leadership has been compared to that of some Middle Eastern leaders, autocrats, dictators. You may remember he referred to Egypt's Sisi as his favorite dictator at the G7 last year. Is that comparison fair, comparing him to those sorts of leaders?
Well, I think the comparison is right if we maintain this idea that he is trying to militarize the whole situation. Why do we need soldiers to fight those protesters? I think we have the police apparatus, we have the governors of various states who can handle the situation. So there is no room for adding salt to injury. And I think since my colleague has mentioned the political caliber of Trump, so far I'm asking the question: what is the development of Trump's political mind? Has it evolved? Has it progressed over the past 4.5 years? Unfortunately, all I can tell is that he is genius in two dimensions. One, he is a good architect of perception. He likes to create this image, this maverick right-winger who is going to face evil and stop everything. Number two, he is also a weak politician. He is not a strategist. He is only somebody who can create a new cycle. He would like to throw meat to a dog and play the dance throughout the day and night. So what he has given us as Americans is this idea that he wants to be the clown of the day, and he doesn't care whether we laugh or we ridicule him or we find his presidency is a series of failures. He doesn't care. So I think there is some stubbornness within this Trumpian mind. He doesn't want to revisit his actions. And he is somebody who is driving a truck that has lost, brakes, basically. So he is just moving forward.
Niambi, you said it's not all on Donald Trump's shoulders. If we look to the more systemic racism here, how can the conditions that have created the systemic racism that we see now, how can that be tackled? Say Americans do vote out Donald Trump come November. Does that tackle anti-blackness?
Absolutely not. I mean, that is an American, to me, right, from my opinion, a foundational principle of this country. I mean, this country was founded on Native American removal and enslavement and exclusion of all those who were not considered to be of the people, right? All those who were not considered American. And so we saw that this was already a weak, kind of stitched together country that never got as far as it did without resistance. The reason that there is a Voting Rights Act and the reason that there is any kind of semblance of social justice right now is because people have actively resisted their own exclusion in this country. All of that comes before Donald Trump. But what Donald Trump has done is brought that kind of racist feeling that has always sort of been there, but had no place of safety and no place of legitimacy. He's brought that in from the cold and said, you have a place here. I mean, look at the people that he surrounded himself with, right? Like Stephen Millers and the Steve Bannons of the world.
Now, I'd like to just put one last question to you. Given all of this, if we're looking ahead, I mean, how should the Trump administration change its rhetoric now? What can Donald Trump do to change the course of what's happening on the ground now?
Well, honestly, I think he's painted himself into a corner. He has said law and order. He has made that statement yesterday. And I think it's very difficult for him to now walk it back because these groups that are on the ground have been telling us how to do that. De-escalate the situation. Take the police presence down. Don't baton us. Don't mace us. Right? Walk with us, in fact. These are very clear directives that he was getting all this week. And instead, he doubled down on being the president of law and order. So I think for him to take a step back, he would look weak. And I think he would see himself as weak. So I think he's committed, right, to this language of violence and inviting it, inciting it, the violence that is. So I don't think that there is anything he could do to change course. And even if he did, I don't think people who, like me and others, would actually believe that it was sincere at all.
Yeah. Okay, we'll have to leave it there for time. Really appreciate all of your time from Washington, D.C.
Thank you.
Niambi Carter and Jennifer Victor, and from Doha, Mohammed Cherkaoui. Thank you. Thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is AJ Inside Story. From me, Vinell, and the whole team here. Bye-bye for now.